The 911 call came from a 12-year-old boy, hurt, terrified, and whispering that his own brother was targeting the family. When officers raced to the address in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, they had no idea they were walking into one of the most disturbing scenes in the state's history. Robert Bever, born in 1996, and his younger brother Michael, born in 1998, were the oldest of 7 siblings in the Bever family. The household was quiet and private. They lived in a suburban neighborhood, but neighbors said they rarely saw the children, and many didn't even know the family's names until after the case made headlines. Their father David was 54. Their mother April was 45. All 7 children, Robert, Michael, Daniel, Crystal, Christopher, Victoria, and the youngest, just 2 years old, were homeschooled, with little contact outside the family. To the neighborhood, they were simply the family that kept to themselves. Behind closed doors, life wasn't as calm. Crystal, just 13 at the time, later testified that their father often treated the children harshly. Robert would claim in later interviews that both parents viewed the world with hostility, often talking about biblical Armageddon and revenge on society. On the night of July 22, 2015, Robert and Michael put on protective gear, brought sharp objects, and carried out a planned act inside their own home. Moving from room to room, they targeted family members one by one. David and April were the first. Then came their younger siblings, 12-year-old Daniel, 7-year-old Christopher, and 5-year-old Victoria. Daniel, despite being gravely injured, showed extraordinary bravery. He managed to call 911, giving the address and pleading for help before Robert found him again. Crystal also suffered severe injuries but survived, later naming her brothers as the ones responsible. The youngest child, just 2 years old, was found unharmed. When police arrived minutes later, they found Crystal injured and rushed her to the hospital. Inside the dark, silent home, they discovered the victims. Robert and Michael had already fled into the woods but were caught hours later, still wearing body armor and carrying sharp tools. Investigators soon learned this was no spur-of-the-moment act. The brothers had planned it for months, gathering weapons, body armor, and a flash drive with detailed notes. Their goal wasn't just the family. They planned to take the family's car and carry out a large-scale public act, aiming to surpass the victim count of previous mass incidents. Robert even wanted to post videos of what they'd done online. In 2016, Robert pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree homicide and 1 count of intent to end life, avoiding the capital penalty, but receiving 6 life sentences without release. Michael went to trial in 2018, with his defense claiming he'd been manipulated by his older brother. The jury didn't accept it. He was also sentenced to life, with parole eligibility only after 225 years. Crystal recovered and later testified about what happened, her account playing a key role in Michael's conviction. The Bever home was demolished and replaced with Reflection Park, a memorial honoring the victims and first responders. Today, Robert remains in a maximum security prison, Michael in another facility, and the surviving siblings live privately, far from the public eye. Up next are 2 teenage brothers, 1 hotel room, and a night in Columbus that ended in tragedy. In the early hours of March 24, 2024, the city of Columbus, Georgia, woke to shocking news. At the Spring Hill Suites Hotel on Whittlesey Boulevard, someone called 911 to report that a person had been shot. When officers arrived, they found 16-year-old Denny Henderson lying on the floor in one of the rooms. He had a serious wound from a firearm. Paramedics tried to save him, but their efforts were not successful. The hotel room looked like there had been a struggle. Furniture was overturned. Items were scattered. There were visible red traces on the floor. Investigators quickly began piecing together what happened. They reviewed hotel security footage, spoke with witnesses, and collected evidence from the scene. Before long, they identified 2 people they believed were responsible. Brothers Darian Montgomery, age 16, and Patrick Montgomery Jr., age 17. The Montgomery brothers were known to police. Their past records only showed smaller issues, like missing curfew, taking items without permission, and skipping school. However, they had grown up in an area where street disputes and unsafe situations were common. Friends and neighbors said their home life had been unstable. They were often around people who were involved in risky behavior. The exact reason for what happened that night is still unknown. Some believe there was a disagreement between the brothers and Denny that became heated. Others think there may have been a longer conflict or personal issue. Police have not confirmed the true cause, leaving the why unanswered. After months of searching, Officers found the brothers in Lee County, Alabama. On September 17, 2024, almost 6 months after the incident, they were taken into custody without resistance. The next day, they were brought back to Muskogee County, Georgia. Both Darian and Patrick were formally accused of taking a life and of having a firearm during the act. Even though they were under 18, the seriousness of the charges meant their case was moved to adult court. This showed that prosecutors planned to seek the strongest penalties allowed under Georgia law. Before the trial, prosecutors explained the evidence they believed connected the brothers to what happened. This included witnesses who placed them at the hotel, security footage that matched their movements, and forensic testing linking a firearm to the injury that ended Denny's life. The defense argued that there was no direct proof the brothers were the ones who fired the weapon. They said the state was relying too much on indirect evidence. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled with emotion. Denny's family attended every day, often holding pictures of him. The prosecution described the brothers as making reckless choices that led to a tragic outcome. They said the brothers brought a firearm to the hotel, and that this decision turned a dispute into something fatal. The defense challenged this. They pointed out differences in witness stories and questioned whether certain pieces of evidence could be trusted. They argued the state had not proven exactly who fired the shot or whether both brothers took part in it. Jurors heard from police officers, forensic specialists, and people who knew both Denny and the brothers. The prosecution also focused on what the brothers did afterward, leaving the hotel and traveling to another state, saying it showed they were trying to avoid responsibility. After several days of testimony, the jury began deliberating. They spent multiple days reviewing the evidence and weighing the arguments from both sides. In the end, they found both Darian and Patrick guilty of taking a life and of having a firearm during the act. The sentencing was tense. Prosecutors asked the judge for the maximum punishment, pointing to the seriousness of the case and saying the brothers showed little regret at first. The defense asked for a lighter sentence, noting their young age and the chance they could change in the future. The judge decided on life in prison without the possibility of parole. This meant the brothers would never be released. Before leaving the courtroom, they were allowed to speak. Darian said, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I'm sorry." Patrick looked at his younger brother and quietly said, "We were just kids. I wish things had turned out differently." In the next case, family secrets surfaced, and within hours, the stepfather was gone. Pharr, Texas, sits in the Rio Grande Valley. It is known for its tight-knit neighborhoods and its border town culture. But in January of 2022, it drew national attention after a disturbing and tragic situation came to light. Brothers Alejandro and Christian Treviño, along with their friend Juan Eduardo Melendez, were accused of severely beating their stepfather, Gabriel Quintanilla, which led to his passing. Investigators said the incident began after an accusation that Quintanilla had behaved inappropriately toward the brothers' 9-year-old sister. The story quickly became more than a local headline. It turned into a national discussion about justice, taking matters into your own hands, and what can happen when actions are taken outside the legal process. Alejandro and Christian grew up in Pharr. Their family lived a modest life. In time, their mother married Gabriel Quintanilla. He became stepfather to the brothers and their younger sister. At the time of the events, Quintanilla was 42 years old. Before January of 2022, Quintanilla already had a troubling record. He was wanted for charges involving ongoing inappropriate contact with a child and for aggressive behavior toward a family member. These accusations were not new. Reports suggested there had been a pattern of harmful behavior in the past. The cases were still unresolved at the time of his passing. Many later questioned whether the system could have acted sooner to protect those at risk. Everything began on January 20th, 2022. The brothers' 9-year-old sister reportedly told a family member that Quintanilla had touched her inappropriately while at an RV park. This information quickly reached Alejandro and Christian. For them, the claim was something they could not ignore. Christian decided to confront Quintanilla. Police records state that an argument followed, and it turned physical. Christian then left the location. Afterward, he reached out to Alejandro and their friend Juan Melendez. Later that same day, the three found Quintanilla again. Investigators described what happened next as a series of dangerous encounters. In at least one of them, the group reportedly used brass knuckles, causing severe injuries to his head. The incidents happened in more than one location, not just a single fight. After one of these incidents, the men placed Quintanilla in the bed of a pickup truck. Instead of taking him to a hospital or calling authorities, they drove to a field in nearby McAllen, Texas. Investigators believe he might have still been alive when he was left there, A farmer later discovered him and called the police. An autopsy determined that the cause of passing was severe head injuries from blunt force. The injuries and where he was found showed the level of harm involved. The suspects were identified quickly. Christian was 17 years old. Alejandro and Juan Melendez were both 18. All three were taken into custody within days. Christian faced the most serious accusations: capital charges, causing serious harm with a dangerous object, and participating in organized harmful activity. Alejandro faced causing serious harm with a dangerous object and organized harmful activity. Melendez faced similar charges to Alejandro. From the beginning, the community had mixed reactions. Many were outraged by what was said to have happened to the 9-year-old girl. Some felt sympathy for the brothers, believing they acted out of desperation to protect her. Others said that, no matter the reason, taking a life outside of immediate self-defense is against the law. Support for the brothers grew online. Petitions calling for their release gathered momentum. One petition even reached more than 200,000 signatures, arguing that the brothers were motivated by a need to protect their sister. Many called it a failure of the legal system to stop someone accused of causing harm sooner. Prosecutors argued the charges were justified. Their main point was that this was not an act in the middle of an immediate threat. They said it was a prolonged series of harmful actions, which made it different from legal self-defense. The case raised complicated moral questions. Some viewed it as family members defending a child. Others saw it as a dangerous example of taking justice into one's own hands. Supporters said families are often left with no options when the system fails them. Critics warned that bypassing the law can lead to more harm and more unfair outcomes. The legal process has been slow. Since their arrests in 2022, trial dates have been delayed several times due to motions, evidence review, and scheduling issues. As of July 2025, a joint trial for all three is set for October 27, 2025. The jury will hear the evidence for all of them in one trial. If convicted of the most serious charges, Christian could face life in prison without parole. Alejandro and Melendez are not facing capital charges, but could still spend decades in prison if found guilty. Now was the next act: desperation, greed, or a split-second decision that went too far. Christopher and Christian Kelly grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. The city has a long history, but also struggles with poverty and limited opportunities. Their neighborhood had few resources. Trouble was a common part of daily life. Not much is known about their home life, but the area they lived in made it hard for young people to stay on the right path. Many kids in the community faced hard choices. For some, programs, school, or family support helped them stay focused. For others, the pull toward risky activities was much stronger. In April 2025, things took a serious turn for the Kelly brothers. On the evening of April 4th, at around 7:12, Montgomery police received a call. The report said there had been a shooting on the 3600 block of Madeline Lane in the Forest Hills neighborhood. Forest Hills is mostly residential, but like many areas in the city, it has seen its share of dangerous incidents. That night, there was an armed confrontation. It started as a plan to take valuables and ended with someone losing their life. When officers arrived, they found 17-year-old Xavier Simpkins on the ground with a serious gun injury. Emergency teams tried to help him, but he passed away at the scene. His sudden loss left friends, family, and the neighborhood in shock. Investigators began putting the events together. Police said the Kelly brothers, Christopher, who was 19, and Christian, who was 18, were involved. Another boy, who was under 18, was also part of it. They had targeted Simpkins and another 17-year-old male. The goal was to take money and belongings. During the confrontation, the situation became tense. Reports do not clearly say whether Simpkins refused or if there was an argument. But what is certain is that it escalated. A gun was fired, and Simpkins was hit. The group then ran away with about $500 in cash and an Apple iPhone 12 worth around $1,000. What was meant to be a quick grab of valuables turned into something far worse. Bringing a weapon and using it over possessions showed how far they were willing to go. Montgomery police moved fast. Detectives spoke with witnesses and checked video from nearby homes and stores. They followed every lead. Within 4 days, they identified those involved. On April 8th, police arrested Christopher and Christian Kelly. They were charged with capital-level homicide and first-degree theft. In Alabama, if a life is taken during certain serious offenses, including theft, it can be treated as capital level, which carries the harshest punishments. The third suspect, the underage male, was also taken into custody and charged in the same way. His name was not released because of his age. It has not been decided if he will be tried as a youth or as an adult. This choice will greatly affect his sentence if found guilty. Christopher and Christian were placed in the Montgomery County Detention Facility. They were not allowed bail because of the capital-level charges. Their arrest brought some relief to Simpkins' loved ones, but his loss is something that cannot be undone. Friends remembered him as a young man with big potential who did not deserve what happened. The case has also led to more talk in Montgomery about young people being involved in dangerous acts. The suspects themselves are barely older than teenagers, with one still legally a minor, and yet they may now spend the rest of their lives behind bars. This case shows a targeted theft that turned fatal. The next case turns a night of celebration into chaos and destruction. On the evening of April 15, 2023, a Sweet 16 birthday party in Dadeville, Alabama, turned into chaos. The celebration was held at the Mahogany Masterpiece Dance Studio for Alexis Dowdell's birthday. It started as a joyful gathering of friends and family, but things took a serious turn when loud sounds broke the mood. According to reports, the noise began when a speaker fell to the floor. Someone then made an announcement asking anyone who had a firearm to leave the venue. Despite this, the situation quickly escalated. Multiple shots were fired, leaving 4 people who lost their lives and 32 others hurt. Among those taken into custody were brothers Tyreek McCullough and Travis McCullough from Tuskegee, Alabama. Tyrese was 17 years old. He was a student at Booker T. Washington Magnet High School and played on the football team. Travis was 16. He had been expelled from the same school before the incident happened. Both brothers faced 4 counts of reckless loss of life, along with several other serious charges, including first-degree and third-degree physical harm. They were arrested on April 18, 2023. Due to how severe the situation was, they were charged as adults. After the incident, law enforcement groups such as the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, the FBI, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives began a detailed investigation. They found 89 shell casings at the scene, showing that multiple firearms were used. Witnesses shared that some of these weapons had been altered to fire continuously. In May 2023, a Tallapoosa County grand jury issued 145 charges against those involved. These included 20 counts of reckless loss of life, 24 counts of first-degree physical harm, and 1 count of third-degree physical harm. The McCullough brothers were part of those formally charged. By March 2024, it was decided that the suspects would have separate trials. Officials said this was to make sure each person had a fair process. The Dadeville tragedy deeply affected the community. Among the people lost was 18-year-old Phil Dowdell. He was a high school senior just weeks away from graduation and had earned a football scholarship to Jacksonville State University. This event brought attention to concerns about youth and the use of firearms, as well as the lasting impact on families and neighborhoods. Up next is a recliner, a lifeless father, and a fire. But the most shocking part came in court, and if you find stories like these important, consider subscribing for next. Derek and Alex King grew up in a family that seemed ordinary at first glance, but behind closed doors, there were tensions. Their father, Terry Lee King, was 40 years old when the incident happened. The family lived in Cantonment, Florida, a small town near Pensacola. Not much is known about the boys' earliest years, but their home life was shaped by complicated family relationships. Their mother, Kelly Marino, was not living with them at the time. She later said her sons did not fully understand the seriousness of what was happening after they reached a plea agreement. She explained that the boys thought they were simply going to a playground, showing how little they understood about their situation. On the night of November 26, 2001, Derek and Alex struck their father with an aluminum baseball bat while he was asleep in his recliner. Afterward, they started a fire inside the home, possibly to cover what had happened and confuse investigators. Firefighters later found their father's body inside the burned house. At first, the brothers said they acted because they wanted to stop what they described as emotional mistreatment. They mentioned being stared down and spanked. But their story changed over time. Later, they claimed that a family friend named Ricky Chavis had encouraged them to harm their father, and even said Chavis might have been the one who did it, while they took the blame. The case became more complicated when Ricky Chavis was brought into the investigation. He was accused of helping the boys afterward by hiding them and cleaning their clothing, which had red stains on it. Chavis was later found guilty of holding the boys against their will and for helping after the act. However, he was found not guilty of directly taking their father's life. Some jurors believed Chavis could have been the one truly responsible, not the boys. Court hearings were filled with conflicting statements. The brothers first admitted to what happened, but later claimed Chavis was the one behind it all. Their lawyers argued that Chavis pressured them into lying. This left jurors uncertain about what really happened and whether the trial was entirely fair. In September 2002, Derek and Alex were found guilty of a lesser form of homicide, but this decision was overturned later. They then pleaded guilty to an even lesser charge as part of a deal. Derek received 8 years in prison and was released after serving 7. Alex was given 7 years and was released after 6. The case drew attention to the difficulties in handling serious cases involving young people and deciding fair sentences for them. Ricky Chavis received a 35-year prison sentence for his role. His conviction showed that the legal system treats those who assist in serious acts as responsible, even if they are not the ones who directly carried them out. Now see how the next brothers turned their backs on faith and ended their own family's future. Brian and David grew up in a strict Jehovah's Witness household in suburban Salisbury Township, Pennsylvania. Their father, Dennis, worked as a high school janitor. Their mother, Brenda, was deeply involved in their faith. Both parents tried hard to guide their sons. They sought help from counselors and faith-based programs. But the brothers turned away from their upbringing. They embraced a neo-Nazi skinhead lifestyle. Brian tattooed the word berserker across his forehead. David inked Sieg Heil above his eyebrows. They shaved their heads, wore military-style clothing, and spoke casually about racial hatred. At school, they even talked about harming a cat in a disturbing way during lunch. Was this rebellion against their faith, or something deeper? Their parents begged them to change. They even reached out to the Anti-Defamation League for help. Nothing worked. One evening, Brian, 17, David, 16, and their cousin Nelson Ben Birdwell III, 18, came home after watching a movie. Inside the house, Brenda confronted her sons about Birdwell being there. Suddenly, Brian restrained her and forced a pair of shorts into her mouth. He then wounded her several times with a kitchen stake tool. One injury reached her lung. After that, he struck her repeatedly with a weight. Meanwhile, David and Birdwell went upstairs. Dennis, 54, was sleeping. They hit him multiple times with an aluminum baseball bat and a metal exercise bar. In another room, 11-year-old Eric was also asleep. He was struck repeatedly with a 3-foot pickaxe handle until he stopped moving. Afterwards, they loaded a shotgun. They left in their mother's 1988 Pontiac convertible. They fled the area, but only for a short time. 3 days later, they were located in Michigan. All 3 were brought back to Pennsylvania. Brian and David were charged with multiple counts, including taking part in the incident parents and planning the act. Birdwell faced similar charges, along with vehicle theft and breaking probation. Authorities called it one of the most extreme incidents the Lehigh Valley had ever seen. In 1995, juvenile laws were different. Brian and David were tried as adults. They received life sentences without parole. Birdwell also got life in prison. While they were all found guilty in taking the parents' lives, none were convicted specifically for Eric's case, though evidence pointed to all of them being involved. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. In 2024, the brothers were resentenced in Lehigh County Court. During the hearing, the court saw old video footage from the scene. Their new sentences were 60 years to life. This means they could seek parole in their 70s. At that hearing, Brian, now 46, cried as he spoke. He said, "Everyone deserves to live a safe, happy life, free of harm and pain, and I took that away from my family and my community. I would give anything to have my family back and take away all the trauma." He added that he hoped his faith would allow him to see my family again, apologize to them, and beg for their forgiveness. David's lawyer argued that David had been influenced by following his older brother's lead. The next brothers began as trusted neighbors and ended as the most feared men in Virginia. Linwood Earl Briley was born on March 26, 1954, in Richmond, Virginia. His younger brother, James Dyrell J.B. Briley Jr., was born on June 6, 1956, in the same city. They had another younger brother, Anthony. All 3 grew up in Richmond's Highland Park neighborhood. Neighbors remembered Linwood and J.B. as helpful kids. They often did yard work and odd jobs. But inside their home, things were different. The brothers kept unusual pets, including tarantulas, piranhas, and boa constrictors. Their father was so worried he locked his bedroom door every night. Linwood's first serious act happened in 1971. He was 16 at the time. He took a rifle, looked through his window, and shot his elderly neighbor, Orlean Christian, who was hanging laundry. At first, people thought she passed away naturally. But a funeral director noticed a small wound. A detective traced the shot back to Linwood's house. Linwood admitted it calmly. He said, "I heard she had heart problems. She would have passed soon anyway." The court treated it as involuntary manslaughter. Linwood served 1 year at a reform school. JB also had trouble early on. During a police chase, he fired at an officer. He spent time in juvenile hall. What drives two teenage brothers from being helpful neighbors to hurting strangers? And how do they move on to even more serious acts? In 1979, Linwood, JB, Anthony, and an accomplice named Duncan Meekins went on a months-long spree across Richmond and Henrico County. Their actions were random. They didn't care about anyone's age, race, or social status. One of their first incidents involved a couple at home. Linwood knocked on their door saying he had car trouble. Once inside, he tied them up, took their belongings, and set fire to the house. Later, they forced a disc jockey named Johnny G. Gallagher into his own car trunk. They took him to a deserted island and harmed him fatally. Linwood was wearing a ring stolen from the victim when authorities caught him. Another victim, Mary Wilfong, was followed home and suffered serious injuries. Their worst incident happened in North Richmond. Judy Diane Barton, who was 8 months pregnant, lived there with her partner and 5-year-old son. Linwood and Meekins targeted Judy. JB then caused severe harm to Judy. Meekins harmed her partner, and JB also harmed the child. Police nearby heard noises and saw them leave. The victims' bodies were discovered 3 days later. This event ended their spree. The brothers were arrested 2 days after the Barton incident. Their trial attracted widespread attention. A judge described their actions as the worst spree of harm, theft, and harm the court had seen in 30 years. Under Virginia law, capital charges applied only if a brother physically caused the harm. Linwood faced the highest penalty for what happened to Gallagher. JB faced the highest penalty for what happened to Judy and her son. Both were found guilty of multiple counts, including capital harm, first-degree harm, theft, firearm use, and an offense involving inappropriate contact. Even in custody, they were dangerous. On May 31, 1984, Linwood and JB led an escape from Roe at Mecklenburg Correctional Center. They tried to burn guards. Other inmates stepped in to prevent further harm. The brothers were caught weeks later in Philadelphia after a large law enforcement effort. Once all appeals ended, they faced the state's ultimate penalty. Linwood passed away on October 12, 1984. JB passed away on April 18, 1985. Linwood's last meal included grilled steak, baked potato, green peas, salad with French dressing, rolls with butter, cake, peaches, punch, and milk. His final words were, "I am innocent." JB had fried shrimp with cocktail sauce and a lemon-lime soft drink. In his last moments, he smiled at witnesses and asked twice, "Are you happy?" In the early hours of March 1, 2008, something shocking happened in the small town of Alba, Texas. Erin Caffey, a 16-year-old high school student, planned a harmful act on her family. Her mother, Penny, and her 2 younger brothers, Matthew, who was 13, and Tyler, who was 8, were seriously harmed. Her father, Terry Caffey, was also injured when he was shot 5 times, but he survived and managed to escape the house, which was set on fire. Later, he identified Erin's boyfriend, Charlie Wilkinson, as one of the people involved. Erin grew up in a very religious Christian household in a rural area. Her father, Terry, worked as a youth pastor, and the family was very active in their church. Erin had been homeschooled for several years because she was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. She had recently returned to public school. It was at this school that she met Charlie Wilkinson, who was 18, and she quickly became infatuated with him. Her parents strongly disapproved of the relationship. They became especially concerned after finding Wilkinson's social media page, which had inappropriate content. Erin's mother demanded that she end the relationship. This rejection made Erin very angry and resentful. She and Wilkinson began making plans to remove the obstacles to their relationship. They spent several weeks preparing for the event. They also involved Wilkinson's friend, Charles Wade, and his girlfriend, Bobby Johnson, to help carry out the plan. On that night, Wilkinson and Wade entered the Caffey home with firearms and a samurai sword. They seriously harmed Penny and Matthew. Tyler was targeted with the sword. Terry was shot several times but managed to survive. Meanwhile, Erin waited outside with Johnson, who drove the getaway vehicle. After that, the house was set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Terry crawled to a neighbor's house and called 911. His call gave the authorities the information they needed to arrest everyone involved. All 4 people involved were arrested and charged with first-degree homicide. Even though Erin was a minor, she was tried as an adult. In January 2009, she accepted a plea agreement. She received 2 life sentences, but can be considered for parole after 43 years, which would make her eligible for release at 59 years old. Wilkinson and Wade also accepted plea deals and were sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Johnson, who did not directly take part in the act, received a 40-year sentence. She can be considered for parole after serving 20 years. On the morning of October 4th, 2024, the Independence Police Department received a call. Someone had found a person who was unresponsive at an apartment complex on 1st Street in Independence, Louisiana. Officers arrived quickly and discovered 18-year-old Leora Dupard lying in a courtyard. She had been hurt by gunfire. Emergency responders tried to help her, but she was pronounced gone at the scene. Another person was at the scene at the same time. This individual seemed to have been the person the ones responsible were aiming for. Fortunately, they were not harmed. The events shocked the community. Such behavior was unexpected in a neighborhood that was usually quiet. Within a few weeks, investigators identified 2 people connected to the incident. Kenneth Burton, 18, and his younger brother, Jardin Burton, 17, both from Amity, Louisiana, were taken into custody on October 21, 2024. The brothers were charged with serious crimes, including causing harm with intent, attempting to cause harm, interfering with justice, and firing a gun illegally. Authorities said the arrest came after interviews, evidence collection, and reviewing surveillance, though the exact details of the investigation have not been shared publicly. Investigators reported that the Burton brothers had fired at the apartment complex. The intended target was there, but managed to avoid injury. Tragically, Leora Dupard was not the person they were aiming for, but ended up losing her life. Authorities have not explained why the shooting happened. It is also unclear whether the Burton brothers knew either Leora or the intended target beforehand. This has left many questions for her family and the community. Leora was 18 years old. She had family, friends, and connections in the area. Her loss has deeply affected everyone who knew her. Local residents shared their sorrow and concern. The situation shows how quickly harm can affect anyone. Her passing is a reminder of how fragile life can be and how dangerous firearms are when used in unsafe situations. Kenneth Burton, at 18, was legally an adult at the time. His brother Jardin, at 17, was considered a minor. This age difference may affect how the law handles their cases. Louisiana law treats adults and minors differently. This could influence the trial, potential sentencing, and rehabilitation options. So far, there has been no public information about whether either brother has made any statements regarding the events. Pontiac, Michigan, was the scene of a serious incident on December 12, 2024. The event happened in the parking lot of an apartment complex near Auburn Avenue and Clifford Street. A man aged 29 was struck by gunfire several times. Multiple vehicles and some apartment units were also hit by bullets. 2 brothers were later identified in connection with the incident. Their names are Dane Kelly and Derek Kelly. They are aged 17 and 16. Both were taken into custody. Each faces 11 felony charges. Those charges include 4 counts alleging they planned to cause serious harm. The charges also include discharging a firearm inside a building that caused injuries. They are charged with carrying a concealed weapon. They also face 5 counts, alleging possession of a firearm while committing another felony. Authorities say the weapon believed to have been used was a polymer 80, often called a ghost gun. That type of firearm is assembled from parts and has no serial number. Because it has no serial number, tracing it is difficult. The brothers grew up in Pontiac. The city has faced long-term economic challenges and higher rates of illegal activity. Details about the brothers' family life and any prior contacts with law enforcement are limited. What is clear is that they were raised together and later faced these serious allegations. Investigators have not publicly announced a motive. It is not yet known whether the incident was personal, linked to groups, or stemmed from another reason. Many questions remain about what led the brothers to take these actions. The arrests came in early January 2025. Derek Kelly was detained after a foot chase in Orion Township. Dane Kelly was arrested at a home in Pontiac. Police say they recovered the firearm believed to have been used. They also recovered clothing thought to have been worn during the incident. Court hearings moved quickly because of the number of charges. Prosecutors and defense lawyers have presented their arguments. Details about the trial proceedings and the final outcome have not been released to the public. How the courts handle this case could affect how young people with multiple felonies are treated in Michigan. The uncertainty about the brothers' legal fate has left the local community waiting for more information.